in the room and waiting to hear what you got to say. Well, as Gavin didn't really exceed his time limit, I have all the time in the world. Okay, and Gavin, I still owe you something, so that's okay. But I would like to quickly describe to you what the public sector can learn from private economy, especially service providers, and a lot of aspects have already been addressed today. And I hope that I can give you a different view, a very practice-oriented one. I work at Open Exchange. Open Exchange is the manufacturer of the groupware that, for example, has been chosen as best groupware for Phoenix and is a standard there. But we do a lot of groupware projects with private economy companies, with public administrations, with non-profit organizations. And I think with regard to the user numbers for the last 7, 8 years, we've been the biggest provider within the European range. And what I would like to stress today is mainly to focus on digital sovereignty. For many, this is still something new, or maybe a word that has only somehow developed over the last 3 to 4 years. And I think Peter really stressed the importance in his keynote, and the data that support it are not really nice. Digital sovereignty, however, is not that new for other market segments. So if we look at service providers, so like 1&1, German Telecom, and other companies, so it was in 2005, 2006, that they were facing the discussion, do we want to remain digitally sovereign? That was the time where Microsoft and other providers said, dear service provider, you now no longer have to put your applications into your center, but there's something like hosted exchange. So why don't you join us? And then later you'll get it from the cloud, and all this will be much easier to you. And then the service provider said, well, for marginal areas, for anything that's not our core business, we might imagine doing this. But for our bread and butter business, web hosting, that is email, where we generate the majority of our sales, we cannot really hand out the control over the stack. And then the best year, then maybe have an 80.6% margin. And how much that will be in 5 years' time, we don't know. And this is why within the service provider environment, digital sovereignty had been a huge topic, has been for the last 15 years. And we, Open Exchange, have been on this market and have specialized ourselves. And this is against the background that we mainly focused on email in the past, because email is the service which is digitally most sovereign. When you've got a WhatsApp, that is completely controlled, going through Facebook service, and anybody can influence or block them or do whatever they want to do. But anybody of you can give me your email address, and it's irrelevant what kind of system you use, whether it's Microsoft, UpGuard, or anything else. There are open protocols that send it out. Nobody can influence it. It's completely decentralized, it's federated, and it's permission-free, and thus digitally sovereign. And it is still the most important means of communication. Email is something that dies at least once per year a death. At least once per year I read the headline, email is dead, we will just be doing Slack or whatever. And this is why I wanted to show you these figures. So if we look at the figures, and these are the figures for 2021, and then within 1 internet minute, 69 million messages had been sent out through WhatsApp and Facebook messages. But over the same period of time, we have 200 million email. So our communication is, until today, quite digitally sovereign. And as we are really operating to a major extent in this field, I believe that we've got quite a good background knowledge. So where do we come from? Open Exchange was founded in 2005. Over time, we did email front end, then back end. Then we merged with DAPCAT and all the techies. Well, that's the email back end system. And I think 90% of all email systems within the world are based on this. So even if you've got a competitor product, email or Nextdoor has a groupware, but it's always our back-end technology in the background. There isn't really that much else around. And then we further and further developed, and now we have created a fully a full groupware. And as we have done quite a number of large projects, we have many hundred millions of users. And now you'll say, many 100 million users, haven't I heard of Open Exchange apart from public sector? And that is due to the fact that we don't put our name on the product. Just as for the Phoenix Suite, it doesn't say it Open Exchange, but when you open the calendar or anything else, the same is true for other products that our clients use. So the customers that we have rolling out our product, these are service providers which have a multi-client operation and then really deployed for many, many smaller customers. But this is exactly the orientation towards which the public sectors are heading. Because in public sector, I don't have a local server room or local computer center. For example, in Southern Westphalia, we've seen this, and there has been, we've got KDZs and then South Westphalia IT, and in other federal states the same. So one has understood that we need central, larger IT services for operations, and that's the same approach that Phoenix is pursuing. Okay, and then unfortunately, we had to face COVID. And then public administration, they also needed large infrastructure. Well, I think we're the only country in Europe where suddenly we had to build infrastructure for teachers because teachers until 2 years ago didn't have an email address. And then one found out, oh, that's really bad. If they've got Freenet and GMX addresses and if they need to communicate. And then within the last 2 years, I have just to see, we have 4 statewide email infrastructures together with the local conference center operators like Dataport and put them into operation. And it's good. This project is lightweight because there were no data, because they didn't have any email address. So they then just get the email box and can start writing emails. So that's really amazing. And next to these statewide collaboration platforms for teachers, we really did public sector installations for the public sector. And I think the biggest one, which is really having an appeal, is the migration of the state administration in Schleswig-Holstein. So in Schleswig-Holstein, the whole administration with regard to Exchange and SharePoint and ancillary services is going to the combined G-Phoenix stack. So we from Open Exchange, we have 50,000 mailboxes of 25,000 employees in public administration. So what did we learn? What are the learnings? What is relevant? And what are your takeaways? Well, we had to undergo a rethinking. And what I really would like to stress, though, just tell you that usability or user experience is important. And we heard about it today already. So you really have to make sure that the product fits to the user. And a normal standard groupware product in public administration is not fitting. Why? Well, because the user works very differently. I've given you the example of Schleswig-Holstein. So we have got 25,000 employees, but 50,000 mailboxes. Well, half of them are just functional accounts. So especially for taxation purposes, but in tax authorities. So they're functional mailboxes where very detailed logics allow you to have access to, and you have to make sure that during parent leave or sick leave or whatever, the work continues. And of such cases, you have 7 or 8 different ones. And this is why public administration cannot really switch to open source that easily and just create something. And because then the users will run wild. Because if there is some provider who doesn't have any experience in public sector, then it's wrong. And this is why we said we have to sit down with the public administration, have to understand what they're doing before developing a product. So from municipalities and also from the land level and the federal level, we did a user study. So we talked with people from the Federal Crime Office, with tax offices, and all different other public servants asking, what do you use? With whom are you working? What are you doing? And then we had an endless list of requirements. And then we started to implement this for the product. And we did this next to our normal development product with a dedicated team. And Dataport really provided us excellent support. They had a lot of expertise in this. And the first version of this result was then provided at the end of last year. And 14 days ago, it was presented to the state of Schleswig-Holstein. There was a mild applause. And so I think that we are on the right track. So I talked that much. So usability comes first. But usability doesn't mean that I can already click and say it's OK. But usability first means that I have to understand what the user who will use my product will do with it. And this is blood, sweat, and tears. This is not something that you can easily do within half a year. You really have to invest time and resources, and you have to take it seriously. Then the next point is user onboarding. So I rolled out the version. I think it is fit to purpose, but how can the user now be onboarded? And the big service provider projects gave us a lot of experience because they regularly have this experience that they migrate millions of users. I think the last singular installation that we've got is in France. I think 30 million users on one installation. And by the way, it's a system that we collaborated with Univention. So the 30 million different identities that are managed. And when you have 30 million users, and I don't know how long it took to migrate them, but it took some time. And then you've got the challenge. If only 1% are turning away from this migration process and call the call center, then this will be the biggest cost component with regard to the business case. This is why you have to work very carefully and have to be very proactive and need a long preparational phase for the migration process. And the same is true for public sector, I believe. And the precursor model, when we started and when we approached this with our standard model, which is really good, which allowed us to migrate many hundred million users, and we saw we'd fail. And why is that so? Well, service provider environment, there the large number of users is migrated from right to left, and then you've only got technical bandwidth, and then that's. And if a user needs a daytime to read the FAQs or calls the service provider, well, then he has to live 1 or 2 days without a full functioning solution. And if this is just a promille of users who are having this problem, this is not bad. But in the public sector, being able to work is important. If you cannot really can do tax applications, if immatriculation numbers are registering a cat cannot be done, then this is a nightmare. This is why the model is different. I have a very, very long preparational phase, and then incrementally and individually, I have to talk to the individual units and I say, okay, the product is ready. We would like to migrate you in such and such a way. Is that okay for you? And did we overlook something? And then usually they say, oh, yes, we've got still this and that problem, which was not known to the central service. And then you have to look into it again. And what does that lead to? Well, if you migrate a public administration, because of this approach, we need several years. And this means I've got coexistence. So I've got half of them on the old system, half of them on the new system. And I still have to make sure that they interact and work, because it's really bad if I cannot really look at the calendars of half of my colleagues, and because of the limitation. So again, the learning is that we really use the pilot project of the state administration of Schleswig-Holstein, rethought everything. And the good news is that Dataport was ready to take this blueprint, the learnings, that is with regard from a Microsoft stack to an open source stack, to migrate this, to make this available to customers, partner, and anyone in the community who would like to see it. And this is really a unique commitment, and it's important because it doesn't really help to have an open source software that I'm rolling out it is just as important that I really have the optimized tooling with surveys, with migration plan, with the templates for communication, with concepts, how to handle situations for rollout. So that's the second learning. And the third learning, by the way, because we talked about migration coexistence. The fourth one is cloudification. I already mentioned that earlier on. It's not state of the art. If within the municipal administration to just do the services, and it might be sound great to have it in a local computer center. My personal view is that a maximum would be that I have state-owned computer centers. They're quite good in Germany. And then I operate a service for a whole state for all employees within the state or municipal administration. That's the minimum. But I can also imagine that the service providers, we take the path of service providers and maybe a cooperation between Dataport and one or two large operators of conference centers on a state level. And the trust is that high that these suppliers can specialize and then really offer a cloud service for all states and all municipalities within Germany. This certainly would allow for different synergies. The second but last point is integration instead of monolith. And I think within the open source community, there's the biggest need for our discussions. And I think Frank or Mr. von Kalicek, well, maybe the user would expect that everything comes out of one hand. So quite a good experience done or prepared by one. I personally have a deviating opinion. So I follow Dataport solution. I think integration is the solution because if I become too monolithic, then again, I don't have sovereignty because then I don't need interfaces. And again, I would push everything all into one. And this is why within the open source community, we also have to tear our ears and have to say we have to open our products with interfaces, with APIs to allow for integration, and that on a level which gives the user the feeling as if all came out of one head. And Gavin, I think you quite nicely showed us that this is possible with the SNP. So the new Phoenix suite, and we've been working on this for quite some time, and I think this is the direction to take. Now, the last point, we need central points of access and even more dialogue. And I think that this summarizes the whole approach. So we've got a central point of contact like Dataport for the new Phoenix project, and we are just developing it for the digital sovereign workplace. We're talking about workplace, we talk about senders, so a lot of things are happening. So from the work level or on the work level, it has to be implemented in such a way that we understand it's not only about the software stack, which has to be made available for all, but that this is also about the tooling around. Because I had so many talks today with different municipal representatives and town representatives who say, we would love to become digital sovereign, but how do I achieve this? And then you start at zero. So you do web research, you look at the providers and maybe the Phoenix project. But what I need, and this is what the panel discussion showed us, I need some instructions. I have to understand what is the market overview, what are different approaches, how do I do a migration, and who in Germany is specialized and who could help me. And to me, this is also part of the whole picture. And if we had a closer look at this, and if we all focused a bit more on making available what we're working on to others, even initially it's difficult, especially for us who are working in private economy. If we dare really to share something with competitors and others, then in a very short period of time, I think we could really achieve a lot. Okay, I would like to close with 4 reasons regarding IT procurement and to tell you how we, as a group and procuring software, how we approach this with our IT. And what we do is, well, the first commandment is a service that we buy, if it exists as a service, has to be available through different providers. Because if only one provider offers it, then I've got the maximum lock-in and no choice whatsoever. The second topic is it doesn't help me if there are 4 providers offering the services, but if I can't move the data, then it doesn't help. So I need open interfaces for the product, and this is something that the provider has to guarantee and have to be able to move my data. Then I've got a much higher degree of digital sovereignty. The third point is the service must be available as a software, because even if the 4 providers don't feel like continuing, then I still can say, okay, I will operate this service from my own conference center, and that might be even worthwhile. And the fourth commandment, and I don't know who spoke of a gold standard, but the fourth and maximally good argument is the software must be available as open source, because then even if I don't find any providers, even if I do not or cannot really operate it because nobody develops it, I can then develop it further and work with it. So these are ideas for simple reasons that allow you to classify whether you should buy a software, yes or no, depending on how critical the data you have are. And in core processes, I would definitely say get a check or check each of the 4 boxes. That's from my side. I hope that you have a great conference. Looking forward to great discussions. And if you have questions, then we are at our demo counter, or then in 3 hours with a glass of beer at the evening venue, and have a nice continuation of your conference day.